Welcome back to another news dose, everybody. Today we've got a lot of news to go through, albeit I am a bit late, so apologies in advance. But we have a possible Banjo rumor, and this is coming from Nate Drake on Reset Era, so do take this with a grain of salt. He says that the project got the green light in 2022, so I'll be talking about that later. We also have Game Pass. Now, it's no surprise that Game Pass offers tremendous value for everyone, but apparently someone did the math and it adds up to about $9,000 of value every single year. In other news, Lies of P, the Game Pass hit for this year, 2023, is considering moving on to other media formats like TV shows or possible films, anime, etc., similar to the Last of Us TV show or even Arcane and Cyberpunk Edgerunners. And lastly, Fallout 76 has hit a 17 million player milestone, and this is huge going into 2024, but I will explain that later in the video. Let's get this episode started. So first up, we have Banjo Kazooie Rumours. This is coming from insider Nate Drake on the Reset Era forums, and he's suggesting that a new Banjo Kazooie game is currently in active development and that it got the green light in early 2022. In addition to this, Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, has also hinted at a potential revival by saying in a recent, I believe it was a podcast or an interview, that he hears the fans, he hears the Banjo fans. We know that the last entry into the Banjo Kazooie series was the Banjo Kazooie Nuts and Bolts back in 2008 on the 360, so it has been 15 years. To further reiterate that this is just a rumor, we also don't know who the developers are. We do not know the budget of the game, and we do not know the potential release date. As I've said, this is coming from Nate Drake. He is overall a reliable person, but he has got some things wrong in the past. So again, take this with a huge grain of salt. Assuming this rumor is true, I can think of 4 potential developers that would make an amazing Banjo game. These are Rare, the obvious one. We have Toys for Bob from Activision. We have Playtonic, I believe their name was, the developers of Yooka-Laylee, who were made up of veteran developers of Banjo Kazooie from Rare Studios. And lastly, Double Fine. Rare has gone on the record saying they don't want to make a Banjo game, and besides, they are busy with Everwild. Toys for Bob would be an interesting developer because they have remastered and remade Spyro and made sequels to it, as well as Crash Bandicoot. So they'd be a really good developer to take on the IP and put their own spin on it. But this rumor says that it was greenlit last year in 2022. And if we go back to last year, Toys for Bob was under Activision, and Activision had not yet been bought by Microsoft. So I don't think it's them. Playtonic, I believe their name is. They would be interesting because they are veteran developers of Banjo Kazooie. But I think they want to be able to make other types of games. The only one that I'm left with is Double Fine. We know Psychonauts came out in 2022 during summer, so that does leave a lot of time and room for them to be able to take an IP and develop their own spin on it. So I would also like to be able to see what Double Fine creates and does with the IP going forward, because Psychonauts was an amazing platformer. It was both for children and for adults, and if we remember back to Rare, part of that spirit is being witty and having adult jokes. So I think Double Fine would be an amazing developer for the IP. Lastly, I want to touch up on the point of Xbox trying to release one big AAA game every 3 months, and in between those months they pad it out with smaller games or indie games or third-party games on Game Pass. And Banjo Kazooie is and will be a smaller project that costs less, so it does fit in with their roadmap. But not only that, because it will be on Game Pass, it will be a bit more successful compared to the PS4, Xbox One generation or the late 360 generation, where people are more likely to buy bigger games like Last of Us or Uncharted or Ghost of Tsushima's, and they're less likely to try smaller games. But Game Pass offers that opportunity to be able to try things without fearing of wasting your money. Speaking of Game Pass, apparently Game Pass has offered $9,000 worth of value in 2023 alone. Game Pass had high-profile games like Starfield and Atomic Heart earlier in the year. We also had Monster Hunter Rise. Now, the total cost of all these games add to about $8,763. If you remember back to early in the year, it did have a price increase, but I believe this was a tactical move for the FTC because one of their points was that after the Activision purchase, that Microsoft will raise prices, and that's a concern for them. But Microsoft got ahead of that and raised the prices before even being able to buy Activision, so that point becomes moot for them in the court case. Even with the price increase, it still offers tremendous value, and that's not even factor in Activision, which is now owned by Microsoft. We all know that COD is the best-selling game every single year on all the platforms. Maybe not Nintendo Switch because it might not be able to run it, but there are plans to bring it to the Switch, which will further bolster the sale numbers, and it will further reiterate my point that because it's the highest selling game every year, that means that people go out there and buy it. And if they're buying it, they're wasting... not necessarily wasting, but they are spending $70 every single year at least on one game. You could take that $70, get access to COD every single year through Game Pass, and be able to access hundreds of more games that you normally wouldn't want to try or be able to try or be able to afford. That combined with Microsoft's day and date formula of bringing their own exclusives day and date to the service just gives it even more value. We also have EA Play, part of the Ultimate deal, and we've also got 10% off, I believe, off of Game Pass purchases. So if you were to go out and buy COD anyway, you'd be saving about $7. That $7 you could then go and pay for a month of Game Pass. Like, mathematically, it just makes sense. Financially, it makes sense. And objectively, the norm has changed recently where a lot of PlayStation, Sony Pony fanboys, not the casual players or fans of PlayStation, the more outspoken minority, the ponies we like to call them, they try and do mental gymnastics and try and justify the purchase of a $70 game, and they keep saying how Game Pass is for poor people or we like to support developers, and it's just a bunch of mental gymnastics. At the end of the day, why do you care how we spend our money and how we consume our products? Back in the day, I used to rent at Blockbusters. This isn't any different than renting from Blockbusters. It's essentially the same principle. A lot of people consume films through Netflix, so a lot of their points are moot, and it's a bit hypocritical. But my point is, why has it become the norm to not save money, to justify $70 purchases? Why do you care if I'm saving money or not, or how I consume my products? That's up to me. And objectively, saving money is the way forward. Like, why are we arguing against it? It doesn't make any sense. But at the end of the day, Game Pass will further provide value. And if there are more acquisitions in the future, a possible Japanese studio or publisher like Sega or Square Enix or Capcom, or hopefully not Konami, even Western ones like maybe EA or Ubisoft, although I doubt they'll get away with that. Even if it's smaller developers, the acquisition of IPs will further bolster Xbox Game Pass and cement it as the best value in gaming. As I mentioned earlier in the video, Lies of P for me was the surprise hit of 2023 for Game Pass. And recently the developers announced that they were very happy with the reception the game got from Game Pass. Being able to bring these brand new games to Game Pass just shows how incredibly well it will do, because the barrier to entry is so low. People are more willing to try games, and if you've got huge AAA games like Lies of P on there, then people are even more likely to try things. And at the end of the day, what matters is, as gamers, we want to play games. And if a service like Game Pass helps these games get the spotlight it deserves, then that's just a win-win for everyone. The developers, the gamers, the consumers, and as well as Xbox. Beyond that, the developers are thinking about bringing the Lies of P IP to other forms of media like TV shows, movies, possibly even anime or cartoons. We've seen this strategy work well in the past, like with the Sonic movie, with the Super Mario Brothers movie, which made $1 billion+ in 2023. We've seen it with TV shows like the Halo TV show, the Last of Us TV show, and soon to be the Last of Us Season 2 and Fallout TV show. It's completely flipped on its head from what it used to be in the 90s, where video game films weren't as popular, they weren't as critically acclaimed, but because the technology is so advanced that people are able to become more and more creative. For example, Arcane, Castlevania, some of the best video game shows out there. For me, Arcane is the best. Look at something like Cyberpunk Edge Runners to further my point. Cyberpunk was in a state when it was released. It was horrible. It was a buggy mess. But a year, I believe it was, after when the show came out, it spiked in popularity. You could see the charts on Steam that as soon as Edge Runners came out on Netflix, the player base on Steam for Cyberpunk just spiked. And I believe that is a strategy that other companies are going to adopt. We can see it with Bethesda and possibly Xbox, where if there is a tentpole huge game releasing, they're going to try and line it up with a TV show. We can see it with The Last of Us Season 2, lining up with Last of Us Part 2 Remake. We can possibly see it with Fallout. This is a viable strategy, and moving forward, I believe this is how things will be able to branch into different media formats and get as much people in as possible. Couple that with Game Pass, it will work for Xbox's benefit because the barrier to entry is so low that people will be more willing to try these games. Fallout 76 has hit 17 million players. It's such a huge milestone. They are planning on bringing part 2 of Atlantic City, which will feature the legendary Jersey Devil new quests, new areas to explore, and new rewards. However, my problem here is that when they announced The Pit and when they announced Atlantic City, they made it, or at least with The Pit, they made it seem like it's an expansion rather than a mission you select from the menu that you go into that has these small playable areas. I want to be able to explore more areas, bigger areas. We should be able to explore The Pit properly, Washington properly. We should be able to go to the Mojave Desert properly, like in New Vegas. Instead of doing these small, tiny DLCs, I'll call them, they should be doing huge expansions. Speaking of that, they are planning to expand its map southward towards the Shenandoah, which will introduce more quest lines, new factions, and new rewards. The interesting part here is that it's going to introduce new factions. They use the word factions, so they make it seem plural, so there's going to be more than one. And if there is more than one, it makes it seem as if it is going to be a huge expansion, a huge map, where they add a huge chunk to the south of the main game map. We know that the Fallout TV show is coming, and we know they're going to try and line up big expansions like that with the TV show. And as I've said in the Lies of P topic, this is a viable strategy. We can see Sony doing it with Last of Us Part 2, lining it up with the Part 2 remake. We can see Cyberpunk Edge Runners doing it with the Cyberpunk game. And as I've said, it is a viable strategy. It does work. It attracts a more casual audience base. And if these audiences love this TV show or this movie and they want to experience this universe, they'll go out and play it. And more importantly, this will then lead into Game Pass, which will increase subscribers. And I believe Xbox is going to try and lean on this strategy more and more in the future. As per usual, what do you think about Fallout creating a bigger expansion rather than small bite-sized mission pieces? What's your opinion about a possible Banjo game? And lastly, are you subscribed to Game Pass? How many games have you played this year?